Hey there, amazing viewers, and welcome back to our channel where we explore the fascinating minds that shaped our world. Before we dive into today's incredible journey through the mind of William Shakespeare, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's most brilliant thinkers. Now, imagine this for a moment. A young boy from a small town grows up to write stories that would be performed and loved for over 400 years. Stories that would make kings cry, make peasants laugh, and change the way humans understand themselves forever. That boy was William Shakespeare, and today we're going to unlock the secrets of his extraordinary mind. Born in 1564 in the quiet town of Stratford-upon-Avon in England, young William wasn't born into wealth or nobility. His father, John, was a glove maker and leather worker who also served as the town's mayor for a time. His mother, Mary, came from a farming family. This middle-class upbringing would become incredibly important to understanding Shakespeare's psychology, because unlike many writers of his time who came from rich families, William understood both the struggles of common people and the dreams of reaching higher in society. As a child, he attended the local grammar school, where he learned Latin, studied ancient Roman writers, and discovered the power of words. But here's what's fascinating about his mind, even as a young person. While other kids might have just memorized their lessons, William was absorbing patterns of human behavior, storing away observations about how people talked differently when they were happy versus sad, when they were lying versus telling the truth. At 18 years old, something happened that would shape his understanding of responsibility and perhaps add depth to his later writings about love and marriage. He married Anne Hathaway, who was 26 years old and pregnant with their first child. Think about that for a moment. Here's a teenager suddenly thrust into adult responsibilities, marrying an older woman in what many historians believe was a rushed ceremony. This experience of unexpected life changes, and the complexity of relationships would echo through his plays decades later. They had 3 children together, including twins, but tragedy struck when his son Hamlet died at just 11 years old. This devastating loss would profoundly impact Shakespeare's psychological landscape, and many scholars believe you can trace his grief through his later works, especially in the raw emotion of plays like Hamlet. Now, here's where Shakespeare's story gets really interesting from a psychological perspective. Sometime in his 20s, he left his family in Stratford and headed to London to pursue theater. This decision reveals something crucial about his personality. He was willing to take massive risks, to leave comfort behind for an uncertain dream. London in the 1580s and 90s was a dangerous, exciting place full of plague, crime, and opportunity. The theaters were considered somewhat disreputable, places where pickpockets mingled with merchants, where noble ladies sat near common workers. Shakespeare didn't just observe this mixing of social classes. He absorbed it, understood it, and used it to create characters that felt real regardless of their station in life. What made Shakespeare's mind truly special wasn't just his ability with words, though that was extraordinary. It was his deep understanding of human psychology, centuries before psychology was even a formal field of study. He understood that people are complicated, that heroes can have flaws, and villains can have reasons for their actions that make sense to them. Take Macbeth, for example. Here's a brave soldier who becomes a murderer, but Shakespeare shows us every step of his mental journey, how ambition slowly poisons his thinking, how guilt eats away at his sanity. Or consider Othello, where Shakespeare demonstrates how jealousy can transform love into destruction, how our own insecurities can be our greatest enemies. Shakespeare's purpose seems to have been multi-layered. and this is where his psychology becomes really fascinating to examine. On one level, yes, he wanted to make money and become successful. He was a shareholder in the Globe Theatre and made smart business investments. But on a deeper level, he seemed driven by an intense curiosity about human nature. Why do people do what they do? What makes someone choose evil over good? Can love really conquer all, or are we doomed by our flaws? These weren't just philosophical questions for him. They were puzzles he tried to solve through his characters. He gave voice to the voiceless, making servants and fools sometimes the wisest characters in his plays, showing that wisdom doesn't come from social status, but from understanding life. His thinking process was remarkably modern in many ways. He understood that people wear masks, that we show different faces to different people. The famous line, "All the world's a stage," wasn't just pretty poetry. It was Shakespeare's psychological insight that we all perform roles in life. He understood that our past shapes our present, that childhood experiences echo through adult decisions, concepts that wouldn't be formally recognized by psychologists until centuries later. He also grasped the power of the unconscious mind, showing characters driven by forces they didn't fully understand, experiencing dreams and visions that revealed hidden truths. The impact Shakespeare had on history goes far beyond just entertainment. He literally changed the English language, inventing over 1,700 words we still use today. Words like lonely, generous, critical, and assassination came from his creative mind. But more importantly, he changed how we understand ourselves as human beings. Before Shakespeare, most stories were simple morality tales with clear good guys and bad guys. Shakespeare showed that real people are more complex, that we can feel sympathy for flawed characters, that understanding someone's motivation doesn't mean excusing their actions, but helps us understand humanity better. His influence on psychology itself is profound. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, was obsessed with Shakespeare's works, particularly Hamlet, seeing in them deep psychological truths about family relationships, desire, and the human unconscious. Modern therapists still reference Shakespeare's characters when discussing psychological concepts because he captured universal human experiences so perfectly. The way Lady Macbeth's guilt manifests in obsessive hand-washing predates our understanding of obsessive-compulsive behaviors by centuries. The way King Lear's daughters manipulate their aging father shows dynamics of family dysfunction that family therapists recognize today. What's truly remarkable is that Shakespeare achieved all this without formal university education, without traveling widely, without the advantages many of his contemporary writers enjoyed. His genius came from observation, empathy, and an incredible ability to imagine himself into other people's experiences. He could write convincingly from the perspective of a jealous husband, a teenage girl in love, an ambitious politician, a grieving parent, a wise fool, or a tormented prince, because he understood, that all these experiences share common human threads of emotion, desire, fear, and hope. Shakespeare died on April 23, 1616, exactly 52 years after his birth, leaving behind a legacy that continues to grow rather than fade. His psychology, his understanding of human nature, remains so relevant that his plays are performed more now than they were in his lifetime. Every generation finds new meanings in his words because he wrote about what doesn't change even as the world transforms around us. The fundamental experiences of being human, including love, loss, ambition, fear, joy, and the search for meaning. Shakespeare understood that these experiences connect us across time, across cultures, across all the differences that seem to divide us. His ultimate purpose, whether he fully realized it or not, was to hold up a mirror to humanity and help us see ourselves more clearly, more honestly, and perhaps more compassionately. That's the true genius of William Shakespeare's remarkable mind, and that's why 4 centuries later, we're still learning from the insights of that glovemaker's son from Stratford-upon-Avon. Now let's dive deeper into how Shakespeare's mind actually worked when he was creating these timeless stories. Think about this for a moment. Shakespeare didn't have the internet. He didn't have television. He didn't even have many books compared to what we have today. Yet somehow, this man understood people better than most psychologists do today. How did he do it? The answer lies in his incredible ability to observe and listen. Shakespeare spent hours in taverns, markets, and public spaces just watching people. He watched how they talked, how they moved, how they reacted when they were happy or sad or angry. He was like a detective of human behavior, collecting clues about what makes people tick. And here's something really interesting about his psychology. Shakespeare seemed to understand that people are complicated. Nobody is just good or just bad. Even his villains have moments where we feel sorry for them. Take Shylock from The Merchant of Venice. He's supposed to be the bad guy, but Shakespeare gives him one of the most powerful speeches about being treated unfairly. This shows us that Shakespeare's mind didn't think in simple black and white. He saw all the shades of gray in between. His brain was wired to see complexity where others saw simplicity. This way of thinking was revolutionary for his time. Most writers back then created characters who were either completely good heroes or completely evil villains. But Shakespeare knew that real people are much more interesting than that. Real people make mistakes. They change their minds. They surprise themselves with their own actions. This understanding came from his unique psychological makeup. Shakespeare had what we might call today emotional intelligence. He could feel what other people were feeling, even if those people were completely different from him. A king, a servant, a young girl in love, an old man facing death. Shakespeare could step into their shoes and understand their hearts. This ability is called empathy, and Shakespeare had tons of it. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Shakespeare didn't just understand individual people. He understood how groups of people behave together. Look at the mob scenes in Julius Caesar. The crowd changes its mind completely in just a few minutes, swayed by whoever is speaking to them. Shakespeare was showing us something psychologists wouldn't formally study for another 300 years. How people act differently in groups than they do alone. He understood peer pressure, mob mentality, and social influence long before these terms even existed. His plays are like textbooks of human psychology disguised as entertainment. Shakespeare's thinking was also deeply influenced by the world around him. He lived during a time of huge changes. The Renaissance was transforming how people thought about everything from science to art to religion. New ideas were everywhere, and Shakespeare's mind was like a sponge, soaking them all up. He read everything he could get his hands on: history books, poetry, philosophy, even trashy popular stories of his day. Then his brain would mix all these ingredients together and cook up something completely new. This is why his plays feel both ancient and modern at the same time. They're built on old stories, but told with fresh insights that still surprise us today. One of the most remarkable things about Shakespeare's psychology was his understanding of power and ambition. Many of his greatest plays deal with people who want power and what happens when they get it. Macbeth shows us how ambition can destroy a person from the inside out. King Lear shows us how giving up power can drive someone mad. Richard III shows us how some people will do anything to gain power. Shakespeare seemed to understand that the desire for power is one of the strongest forces in human nature. But he also understood its dangers. Power corrupts, as they say, and Shakespeare showed this again and again in his work. This wasn't just storytelling. This was Shakespeare working through his own thoughts about the nature of authority, leadership, and human ambition. Remember, he lived under a monarchy where saying the wrong thing about power could get you in serious trouble. So Shakespeare had to be clever about how he explored these ideas. He set his plays in ancient Rome or medieval Scotland or fairy tale forests, but everyone knew he was really talking about England and human nature in general. Shakespeare's mind also had an incredible grasp of love in all its forms. Not just romantic love, though he wrote about that beautifully, but also the love between parents and children, between friends, between siblings. He understood that love could make people do wonderful things and terrible things. Romeo and Juliet shows us how love can be both beautiful and destructive. Othello shows us how love can turn to jealousy and rage. A Midsummer Night's Dream shows us how silly and irrational love can make us. Shakespeare's Psychology recognized that love is probably the most powerful emotion humans experience, and he explored it from every possible angle. His understanding of family dynamics was equally impressive. The relationship between Hamlet and his mother, between King Lear and his daughters, between Prospero and Miranda in The Tempest. These aren't just plot devices. They're deep psychological studies of how families work, how they fail, how they heal. Shakespeare understood that our families shape who we become, for better or worse. He knew that the wounds we get from our families are often the deepest and longest lasting. But he also knew that family bonds could be the strongest and most redemptive forces in our lives. What's truly amazing is that Shakespeare understood all of this without any formal training in what we now call psychology. He was self-taught, learning by observation and intuition. His classroom was the world around him, and his teachers were the people he met every day. This gives us a clue about his own psychology. Shakespeare was intensely curious about people. He wanted to understand what made them laugh, cry, love, hate, fight, and forgive. This curiosity drove him to create characters that feel more real than many real people we know. Think about this for a moment. Shakespeare was essentially a mirror held up to humanity, but not just any mirror. He was a special kind of mirror that showed not only what people looked like on the outside, but what they felt like on the inside. His purpose, though he might not have known it at the time, was to help humanity understand itself better. Every play he wrote was like a lesson in being human, wrapped up in beautiful words and exciting stories. When we look at his thinking patterns, we see someone who thought in layers. Nothing was ever simple for Shakespeare. A king wasn't just a king, he was also a father, a husband, a man with fears and doubts. A villain wasn't just evil, they had reasons for their actions, pain that drove them to darkness. This layered thinking shows us that Shakespeare understood something profound about human nature. People are complicated, and that's okay. In fact, that's what makes us interesting. His influence started spreading even during his lifetime, but it really exploded after his death in 1616. Suddenly, everyone wanted to read his plays, perform them, study them. But why? What made his work so special that it survived for over 400 years when thousands of other plays from his time disappeared? The answer lies in his deep understanding of what makes people tick. Shakespeare knew that certain feelings and experiences are universal. Love feels the same whether you live in 1600 or 2024. Jealousy burns just as hot. Fear grips just as tightly. By tapping into these universal emotions, Shakespeare created work that speaks to every generation. let's talk about his impact on language itself. Shakespeare invented over 1,700 words that we still use today. Words like lonely, generous, critical, and countless others first appeared in his plays. But he didn't just make up words for fun. Each new word filled a gap, expressed something that couldn't quite be said before. This shows us another aspect of his psychology. Shakespeare was frustrated by the limits of language. He wanted to express feelings and ideas that were too big, too complex for the words that existed. So, he made new ones. Imagine being so determined to communicate clearly that you literally expand the language itself. That takes a special kind of confidence and creativity. His understanding of power dynamics was extraordinary. In plays like Macbeth and Julius Caesar, he showed how power corrupts, how ambition can destroy, how even good people can be led astray by the promise of greatness. But here's what's really interesting. Shakespeare lived under a monarchy where questioning the queen or king could get you in serious trouble. Yet he managed to write plays that critically examined power without getting himself arrested. This tells us he was clever, strategic, and understood how to say dangerous things in safe ways. He wrapped his criticism in historical settings or fantastical stories, allowing his audience to think about their own leaders without directly challenging them. The way Shakespeare wrote about mental health was centuries ahead of his time. Look at Hamlet, who shows clear signs of what we now call depression, or Lady Macbeth, whose guilt drives her to madness, or King Lear, whose mind deteriorates as he ages. Shakespeare was describing psychological conditions that wouldn't be formally recognized by doctors for hundreds of years. How did he know? Because he watched people carefully. He saw how grief could paralyze someone, how guilt could eat away at a person's sanity, how age could steal someone's mind. And he wrote about it with such accuracy that modern psychologists still study his characters. His personal psychology seems to have been shaped by loss. Shakespeare lost his son Hamlet when the boy was just 11 years old. After this tragedy, his plays became deeper, darker, more concerned with death and what comes after. Hamlet, written shortly after his son's death, is obsessed with mortality. This shows us that Shakespeare used his writing to process his own pain. He turned his grief into art, which is something many great artists do. But Shakespeare did it in a way that helped millions of others deal with their own losses. The economic impact of Shakespeare's work is staggering. Today, Shakespeare generates billions of dollars worldwide through theater productions, movies, books, tourism, and education. Entire cities like Stratford-upon-Avon depend on Shakespeare tourism. Universities have whole departments dedicated to studying his work. This economic engine all springs from the mind of one man who understood people so well that his stories became immortal. Think about that. His psychological insights were so valuable that they're still making money 400 years later. Shakespeare also understood the psychology of entertainment. He knew that to keep an audience engaged, you needed variety. So his plays have comedy mixed with tragedy, action mixed with romance, songs mixed with speeches. He understood that people's attention wanders if you give them too much of one thing. This understanding of audience psychology made him incredibly successful in his own time and keeps his plays watchable today. Modern movie makers study Shakespeare to learn about pacing, tension, and emotional variety. His influence on psychology as a field of study cannot be overstated. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was obsessed with Shakespeare and wrote extensively about his characters. Freud even named one of his most famous theories, the Oedipal complex after a character from ancient Greek drama, but he used Hamlet as his main example. Carl Jung, another founding figure in psychology, also studied Shakespeare deeply. These pioneers of psychology recognized that Shakespeare had mapped the human mind centuries before they began their work. In many ways, Shakespeare was doing psychology before psychology existed as a formal discipline. Shakespeare's greatest gift to humanity was showing us that understanding people is the key to everything. He taught us that every villain thinks they're the hero of their own story, that love can make smart people do silly things, and that power changes everyone who touches it. His plays became mirrors where we see ourselves, our friends, and our enemies. Today, 400 years after his death, therapists still use his characters to help patients understand their own feelings. Teachers use his stories to explain human behavior. Writers study his techniques to create believable characters. Shakespeare proved that the human heart hasn't changed much in 4 centuries. We still love, hate, dream, and fear the same way his characters did. So remember, whenever you watch a movie with a complex villain or read a book with deep characters, you're experiencing Shakespeare's legacy. If you enjoyed learning about the mind behind the greatest stories ever told, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Share it with someone who loves understanding what makes people tick. Until next time, keep exploring the amazing world of human psychology.